I am Deepak, and today we have with us Jennifer van Gennip. She is the communications director at Redwood Park Communities. Its mission is to build safe, affordable, hopeful communities that support families and individuals. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
So there has been homelessness and affordable housing crisis in Barrie, which is only worsened by the pandemic and boom in the home prices. I remember when I started, I live in Mississauga. I'm looking for apartments in Barrie. And when I first started, I responded to an ad, and the owner of the property had recently purchased that house. And he had told me that, before he purchased, somebody was living there and they were paying, something 1100, 1200 rent. He did some renovation and then he was asking for 2000 rent plus utilities and everything. And very near to that, I don't remember the location, but very near to that property, there was, a camp set up by, some homeless people. And he wasn't a big investor. He purchased with his two other friends, and one of them was, going to live in the basement. So, is this what is going on in this pandemic? We see the picture everywhere that many low-income renters have been evacuated. So what is your experience on the ground?
Yeah, thanks. That's a loaded question. There's a lot going on there. So, yeah, from a finance and policy and what we're seeing around investments, people choosing to buy a second home or multiple homes as an investment. We're seeing a lot of that, actually. We see corporations getting into that, real estate investment trusts getting into that, but we also see just people getting into that. So I just am in the process this fall of renewing my own mortgage. And one of the first questions my mortgage broker asked me was, she said, the value of your house has gone up a lot. Would you like to take out some extra money and buy a second home? So that's like, I assume, a relatively standard question now when people are just refinancing their house. So I think you are seeing more and more people buying a second property to rent out. And in order to make the math work, because the prices are so high, to make the math work, you do have to rent at $2,000. Like if you're just getting into it now, then you do have to charge like $2,000 a month rent. If you have had a property, like if you bought your townhouse, well, I can even just say the townhouse that we used to live in. When we moved here 12 years ago, we bought a little townhouse for $187,000. There was nothing wrong with it. We lived in it for several years. And then the houses on our street, they were selling for $300,000. And my husband said, this has to be the top. This has to be the top end of what these townhouses will sell for. This is the time to sell. So we sold for about $300,000. And that was 5 years ago. And we moved into this house. But now those houses are listing for $600,000 because there are other townhouses around it that are listing for $600,000, newer townhouses, but there's also a condo building being built on the corner, and those are $599 plus condo fees. So some people are saying, well, for the same price, I could have a backyard, blah, blah, blah. So, and no condo fees. So now my little townhouse is worth $600,000 on the market. So there are a few things going on there. When I bought it at $187, if I had wanted to rent it out, I could have charged like $800, right, a month rent and done okay. But when the interest rates are so low, buying properties and renting them out is very profitable looking to investors. It has better returns than a normal stock portfolio, right? So it's good for investors, but it's bad for renters because, as you know, you come to town and you can't find anything. Like, apartments that used to be $1,100, throw in a new backsplash, and now somehow it's $2,000. That doesn't make any sense. So that's sort of where we're at right now. You also mentioned about the encampments, and we have seen our encampments grow. We have, well, our outreach teams tell us, not Redwood doesn't have an outreach team, but I'm the chair for the Simcoe County Alliance End Homelessness, the Barrie chapter.
Yeah.
And so our member teams, like from Busby and from John Howard Society and the Gilbert Center, they're telling us they're seeing 80 or 90 people at least sleeping outside every night in Barrie.
Wow.
So there's the encampments you see, and then there's a lot of folks tucked away at night that you don't see too. So it's a growing problem. And all the, like what you're talking about, the rents going up in the market rents, right? So we have our market rentals, and then we have our non-market rentals, which is the ones that are subsidized or the ones that Redwood runs, that are not for profit, right? So they're subsidized significantly, and they're specifically targeting people who have almost no money, very little money to pay for their housing. But there's no way they'd be able to be competitive in the market. But the stuff that's happening in the market is putting a lot of pressure on the non-market rentals because more people need them. And then it's spilling out into our shelters too, and even right outside. Yeah, it's pretty dire, actually.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned about, you are also chair of Simcoe County Alliance to End Homelessness. So in that capacity, how you have been working with the homeless community, or on the one hand, and the city on the other hand, try to get some solution or try to solve this problem?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So the Simcoe County Alliance to End Homelessness, there are 5 chapters. So we have a steering committee, and then there are 5 chapters around the region. So I just chair the Barrie chapter. But we are in a bit of a tricky spot, actually, when it comes to, like you said, sort of liaising with the city, because the city, it's the city's bylaws, if you will. Bylaws like, sleeping in parks, those kinds of things. Those are city bylaws. But it's the county that does the social services. So if there's an encampment in Kingston or in Toronto, then advocates can say, if you want to kick them out, then you need to offer housing. But when we try to have that conversation here, it's the city that's kicking them out, and it's the county who's supposed to be offering the housing. So there isn't the same kind of accountability like to hold them to, because it's 2 different entities that are supposed to be solving it. Yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, so city is saying this problem is because of the county. We can't solve this because that's their jurisdiction, and but we have to keep our parks clean, so we can't keep them here. So and then these people are just in the limbo because of
yeah, it's a little bit. And to be fair, the city absolutely, they have told us that they don't go looking for encampments. They will only respond if there are complaints, right? So they don't go looking for people to kick out. They understand that we're in a pandemic and that there aren't a lot of options, and that folks are there because they've run out of other options for the most part, right? And the county, to also be fair, has said we have a little bit more funding. We can provide more funding, but it's not always one of those things that you can just throw money at necessarily, right? You need the staff, you need the spaces. Sometimes you can't just buy your way out of it. Funding helps, obviously, but also we're talking about short-term funding. Like when we're talking about COVID shelter and COVID recovery money, we're talking about fairly short-term funding too. So one good thing that has happened, I think it's a good thing, is that in Barrie, the hotel shelter, they've been staying at one place that had less rooms, and they've just last week moved into a bigger hotel on Bayfield. So now they will have more rooms, so they'll be able to take more people over the winter. That is good. It's unfortunate. I think all of us would like to see more housing instead of more shelter beds. lots of the people who are in the shelter should just be in housing, right? Most of the people, if not all the people who are staying in the shelter, what they just really need is some housing. So it's unfortunate that the funding that was available and the options that were available to us at this time were to grow the shelter instead of add more housing options. But that's where we are, and it'll help keep people inside over the winter.
Yeah. On the Simcoe County Alliance to End Homelessness, I see one stat on the website, and it says the monthly cost of caring for those experiencing homelessness. The shelter bed, is around the expenses around $1,900. Provincial jail is $4,000, and rental supplement is $700, and social housing is $200. So, and I was, of course, now I'm not aware about, the issue. So how come it's only, 200 when it comes to, social housing? Why the cost is so low?
Yeah, that stat is probably close to 10 years old now. It's from the Homeless Hub, but it is probably close to 10 years old. So I would say it has to do with the rent supplement. Probably if you're looking at $200, it's probably the rent supplement, or you're in an apartment building that the housing corporation, that the Simcoe County Housing Corporation, like the nonprofit, that the county already owns, for example. So then it's just people pay a little bit of rent, and then that's just the top up, right? So it's cheaper for sure, social housing, people to offer people housing in social housing for sure. Social housing is expensive to build. We haven't built any new social housing around here in a very long time, in the truest sense, in that the county owns it and that the rents are rent geared to income and very, very low. Most of the new builds have been, most of the new affordable housing builds have been like 80% of market rent, which is still really high for a lot of people. It's better, but it's still too high for a lot of people, right? So that's where that number comes from. Yeah. And regardless, however you slice it, compared to shelters or hospital beds or jail beds, housing is always cheaper.
Yeah, even I was reading, Toronto, when they cleared this encampment from the park, they spent more than $20 million to do that, and many advocates were saying, you could have used that money.
Oh yeah.
To house these people. So that's the problem. I'm unable to understand. And even you talked a little bit about Barrie also takes action when somebody else complains. So why there is this people say there's kind of war on homelessness. Nobody wants them. Mm-hmm. Even though there is money, nobody wants, city doesn't want to help them. They rather spend that money on policing than helping the homeless.
Yeah, well, that's another loaded observation. I think, like in so many things, realizing savings in one spot doesn't necessarily motivate a different department to make changes, right? So if the Department of Community and Children, Community and Social Services spends money to save money over in the health budget, that's not usually how those conversations go. Let's put it that way. At the provincial level, at the federal level, but especially in that scenario, it would be the provincial government. But those conversations, they make sense, like to you and me. But I've also heard people say, we took this idea to the government and they said it's so good, but we have no idea how to implement it. It doesn't fit into any of our boxes, right? We have no idea how to implement it. So we're just going to shelve it because like the machine of the government is so big and it's so set, right? So it's really hard to even when the math works, like that's not new math. right? We know that if you have someone who's in and out of jail, and we know that if they've been in and out, they'll probably be back in a month. They probably spent 90% of their time in jail, and it's mostly because they don't have any housing, right? But somehow making that shift to providing the housing and not criminalizing the homelessness, recognizing that it's a housing issue or a poverty issue largely as well, right? It seems to be just a really hard sell for some reason. I find it very frustrating. I agree with you, Deepak. You were not wrong. You may be new to this space, but you are not wrong. That would be the obvious thing to do. Yeah.
So is this more of a bureaucratic problem? So they are not looking at this systematically, trying to understand, what is the problem, how to work with the different department. Is that more or less the problem?
I would say, yeah. And it's not even necessarily the individuals, because there are individuals within the system who know this too, right? Yeah. But it's just, I don't know.
It is the way the system is set up, and then.
Yeah, and it doesn't, we haven't got to a point yet where it's painful enough to motivate the right people to want to make those changes, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's that makes sense. So you also
not an awesome answer, but it's the best I've got.
No, I understand, because this is, of course, the questions I'm asking is more of questions for policymakers and the bureaucrats, but what I'm also trying to understand is, because this is a good enough, I think, answer for me or for anybody, is that this is how the system is set up. There is the way department works and their budget work, because one-time expense of $20 million compared to setting up the system, you need the whole bureaucracy, and that's way more complicated. And then who will undertake that, and then how you allocate that to budget. It's policing has become, it's this is my observation, is kind of a base of North America. I lived in the US before, and I experienced there as well. It's kind of very colonial setup, and police force has always been a big part of it. So there is not much hesitation in giving them money and trying to solve the problem. But in addressing the issue systematically, then it's bureaucratic, cumbersome. So that's I think that definitely makes sense. So you also work as a communication director for Redwood Park Communities, and so could you explain a little bit about how this started, and what is the mission and how it is undertaken?
Sure. I love talking about Redwood almost as much as I love talking about housing policy. So Redwood was founded in 2009, and our mission is to create safe, affordable, hopeful housing in a supportive community. And so we know that we need to create housing, but we also believe that community is a big part of life, but also of overcoming cycles that you want to break in your life, right? So including homelessness. So we started with a house called United House, and it has 5 furnished apartments for women who are coming from the women's shelter, and sometimes with their kids, of course. And so that's been open since 2013. And one of the things we have found there is when women have to leave everything behind. This is sort of where a lot of our learning about the importance of community has come in. When people have to leave everything behind, they have no more support network, right? Often they have to leave their support network behind as well. And the thing that will make it so that I'm probably never homeless, and hopefully that you are never homeless, is for me, it's that I could go to my mom's. You know what I mean? I could go home, or I have friends who would let me stay with them. I have a network of people who would make sure that even if I lost my house, that I wouldn't be homeless. And so it has nothing to do with my own abilities to maintain my housing. It's that I have a network of support. And so one of the things we do is we provide these apartments that are affordable and that are nice. It's also important to us that they're nice and that you feel welcome. And so often usually when people move in, the fridge is stocked with their favorite foods and their fresh towels in the bathroom and the kinds of toiletries that they have let us know that they like in the bathroom, and they can feel like home, right? And then once that, housing is such a fabulous stabilizer, right? Once you've got that sorted out, and then you can just sort of breathe a little bit and sleep a little bit. And then you start to be able to have ideas again about what you want your life to be like, right? You can move out of survival mode and start planning again. And so we have seen, even just at United House, we have seen women go back to school. We've seen them start new jobs. We've seen them get in new relationships, and we've seen them have babies. We've seen so many women be able to bring their children home. One of the things we had no idea about when we got into this work was how big of a factor housing was in keeping families together. When a family loses their housing, one of the first things that happens is the kids get taken away, right? So in being able to provide this housing, we're able to bring families back together, which is awesome. So United House was our first project. We have Second Suites. That's where we partner with homeowners who want to create an apartment, a legal apartment, in their own space and rent it out a little bit for a little less than what's going in the market. And then we will support the tenants there. We have Lucy's Place, which is a motel conversion project. That one is a housing first community. So everyone that moved in there had experienced significant chronic homelessness. They've been outside for years and years and years. And so living outside, of course, has a lot of challenges. And coming inside after living outside for a long time is also a significant transition. So that has been a really interesting and lovely and beautiful and heartbreaking sometimes, but a really important project for us. And we've met a lot of fabulous people with that one. We're building a project over on the Lincoln Crescent that is sort of in progress right now. That one's going to be for families. Also, I should say all of our buildings are in partnerships. So United House is a partnership with Women's Shelter, Lucy's Place is a partnership with the Busby Center, and this short-term family supportive housing center is with the Salvation Army, the Bayside Mission. And then we have funding applications in for other projects sort of all over that we're not allowed to talk about until until they get funded, or if they get funded, then we're allowed to talk about them. But we're always working on finding new projects. And so that's sort of our social services side. And then we also have a social change side. And over on that side, that's actually where I spend more of my time. And so that's where we have our Yes in My Backyard campaign, the YIMBY campaign, and where we are working on things like outcomes purchasing and alternative financing for nonprofits who want to be able to build. Because one of the biggest roadblocks for a nonprofit that wants to build something is financing. So you don't have to have a capital campaign. Like if you could get financing, then that was at a reasonable rate and that people would actually give it to you, then that certainly helps be able to build as well. So those are, oh, and we have a furniture bank. 2 years ago, we started a furniture bank. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to date, I mean, the number grows every day, almost every week at least, but I know that we have housed about 160 households so far.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's great. We furnished. Did I say housed? We have furnished 160 households. Yeah. So, yeah. And we just love to partner with agencies all over the county that are doing it. We don't like to duplicate anything, but we're just happy to fill gaps and partner and build more housing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned about this Yes in My Backyard UMP campaign, and I was watching this week's city council meeting, and I think it was very heated, very passionate arguments from both sides. So cities. I will just give a little bit background. Cities amending zoning bylaws, and that will make it difficult to build detached accessory dwelling units. They are increasing the rear setback to build an accessory unit on the existing property. You provided a testimony during this week's meeting, and I think yours was more one of the few very balanced testimony. Otherwise, residents were oh, we don't want any new developments, this destroying city, destroying trees and nature. And developers was saying we need this, otherwise that there will be no more supply, and the crisis will just go on and go on. So how how is this mentality versus not in my backyard versus yes in my backyard? So is it how what is your experience in terms of talking to residents and trying to convince them to have more of this properties around their households?
Sure. So first of all, nice segue. Well done. And I would just say, before I talk about the Yes in My Backyard campaign, I would just say, I don't think what the city's trying to do is make it more difficult to build things in their backyard, to build secondary dwellings. What's happened is the province legislated in the More Homes, More Choices Act in 2019. They legislated that any single family unit lot can have a secondary suite in the primary building and also an accessory dwelling on the property. So that kind of, with really no, with not a lot of other rules other than go ahead. So it kind of became the Wild West for a couple of years. And we saw some things being built that really shouldn't have been built. It's not something you would build if these were your neighbors. If you lived in this house and these were your neighbors and this was your neighborhood, this is not how you would go about expanding the properties on your lot. However, because there are a lot of investors coming in, right, to buy a house, and then just, I feel comfortable using the word exploit the new legislation and extract as much money as they can out of this property, because it was a wealth building strategy, right? It wasn't about, it's primarily a wealth building strategy, this idea of buying one house, turning it into 3 and renting it out, right? So the city is trying to manage that without stopping it. So they have made some new rules, some new setbacks, some new height things. I mean, some of the houses that were being built, we're talking about 2-story accessory units in backyards that take up almost the whole backyard, almost right up to the fence, with basements, and it wasn't very neighborly. I feel comfortable saying it wasn't very neighborly in some instances, right? And it really caused a lot of tension. So what the city is trying to do is manage that while still allowing it. And some of the things that they've done actually in this proposed bylaws, and this is sort of where it gets more into into what I'm interested in and what SCATEH is interested in, is they're trying to make it easier to do it in a more affordable way. So for example, there was a higher minimum footprint, like the minimum size in the city bylaws was higher than the Ontario Building Code. So one of the things we had asked them to do, in which they did, was they dropped that minimum down to the building code. So if you wanted to build a tiny house in your backyard that was only 200 square feet with a loft or whatever, you can now. Before you couldn't, it was too small and they wouldn't let you build it. So now you can, if you want to, right? 200 square feet is not very big. I think the new one is 188, which is not very big, but that's what the Ontario Building Code says. So we're no longer imposing a larger minimum than the Ontario Building Code. And there were a few other things that they did that made it easier to qualify for your basement apartment, your second suite. And they also added some things about industrial lands, which was going to make it easier for places like churches, or sorry, I didn't say institutional lands, like not industrial, institutional. So it's going to make it easier for places like churches to build housing on their property if they want to. So the thing, there was a lot in those proposed bylaws, there's pages and pages and pages, right? But the part, and a lot of people were worked up about things like height restrictions and setbacks and things like that. The parts that we were most interested in were the things that would make it easier to build affordable if you wanted to. And the mayor was right. The mayor said, these aren't affordable. These the way they're being done right now, they're not affordable. And he's right. But I would like to also say that doesn't mean they couldn't be, right? Yeah. So one deputation you might have heard, she said, you can't build one of these for less than $250,000. And then if I do that, then the bank won't let me charge less than $1,100 rent. If I say I want to charge $1,000 rent, they won't give me the loan to build it. But I would push back and say, you absolutely can build a tiny home in your backyard for less than $250,000. People do it all the time. And I would also say, getting a loan from a bank is not the only way to do that, because as I said at the beginning, my mortgage broker was very happy to give me extra money in my mortgage if I wanted to. So she asked me if I wanted it for more money to go buy a second property, and I said no, but I could have taken money out. She would have also given me an extra $150,000 if I wanted to build a tiny home in my backyard and rent it out. And then it's up to me what I want to charge, right? It's in my mortgage. Yeah. I can charge whatever I want. So just because secondary dwelling units in the backyard aren't affordable as a business case for investors doesn't mean that it can't create affordable housing. It absolutely can be used to create affordable housing. So in the bylaws, the things that they changed in the bylaws should make it easier. That's my rant about that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you touched on important points from the meeting. One of them is, so I think this came out a lot that they are now, if you want to build extra unit, need to have 7 meters or around 23 feet of you have to leave that space in the back. And if you have a house, then you only have to leave 3 meters. So I think that came out a lot. That was, I think that's what made me think that this is more of trying to discourage. And I think mayor also spoke at one point that we don't this is making neighborhoods crowded. There are cars. So I think at one point he said what we want is one home, maybe 2 units, 1 basement, 1 on the top. But other than that, we don't really want people building around their houses. I think that's this 7 meter requirement. I think it's kind of, because nobody has that kind of space. Like nobody has like 23 feet to live. Existing people.
Some do though. Like there's a map. Did you see the map?
Yeah, I saw the map a bit. Yeah.
With all the green spots, even with the 7 meters. So there are. it does tend to push, for a lot of people, it tends to push that second unit into the middle of their yard, which I'm not sure is, best for anyone. If you're up closer to the fence, I think you can do some landscaping and you can make it feel a little more private. Then it's almost like they're in the middle, like with no privacy. The second unit is all has no privacy. But I'm not a land use planner. I'm not a builder, so I don't honestly. I think we can get into the weeds an awful lot with these setbacks, and I think setback, like we all think about our own perspective, right? So if I'm in my house here, my next door neighbor, my neighbor's house is 3 meters away. And I knew that moving here, and every house on my street looks like that. And it's fine. And these houses are going for way more than they should these days. But my lot is deep. So even with 7 meters, I could put another mini house in my backyard if I wanted to.
That's interesting.
It wouldn't be where I wanted it to go for sure. But I could make it work. If I'm in certain parts of the city, I could put, some of them have really big yards. Like some of the houses, especially in the older part of the city, have really big yards, and there is room without being obnoxious. Like you can do it in a way, you can make a garden. It used to be called garden suites. I don't know if they call them garden suites anymore, but a garden suite or a tiny home, you can do that in an unobtrusive, in an unobnoxious way. Most of your neighbors wouldn't even know it was there. You know what I mean? Some of them don't look any more out of place in a pool house.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So we can say it's more of trying to not have every house build one extra unit, only those who have more space and more land. And the city wants them to be fine if they can be less intrusive on on the neighborhoods, or keeping the privacy of their neighbors, then that's fine. Otherwise this is what I sense, there's so much passion. And one of the residents, he mentioned that how he mobilized more than 400 residents in Ward 1, and then I couldn't help. I'm a kind of a data geek, and I couldn't help but to go back and check some numbers, and I realized in Ward 1, the current councillor, he won by somewhere 150 votes. And this gentleman saying, we have 400 people who oppose this, and I was like realizing this is kind of also building a political pressure, and making this mayor and the councillor realize that this we are organizing, and then this is this is going to be bad for you guys in the next election. And because it's about the truth is politics is also a popularity context. Whoever has more vote wins. So I think this is kind of very organized campaign, and I think this started with this news story by CTV in July that really caught everybody's attention, and now we see a very strong movement built by the residents. So a little bit about this bill. So how I'm just trying to understand in terms of this started in September, this amendment to the bylaws. So and where are we in terms of passing this bylaw, and how do you see these changes?
Yeah, so this actually started before the summer. So there was a planning committee meeting. I don't want to get it wrong, but there was at least a planning committee meeting. No, that was a couple weeks ago. The planning committee meeting was a couple weeks ago, but there was another open meeting. I know I've spoken about it 3 times. So I've been to 3 different meetings about these bylaws. And I want to say May or June, the first meeting about it, where they were first proposed. And then they went back and quite a few changes were made when it came back to the planning committee in September. And now that was city council. There was significant interest in getting it pushed through as quickly as possible this fall, because it was fairly contentious. And what I have heard is that you've seen quite a scramble of people to get their permits pulled under the old rules. Right, of course. So I think my understanding is they passed I eventually went to bed. They were, my understanding
On Monday.
is on Monday night, the bylaws passed, and I'm actually not sure what the phase in is for them. I don't think that if you go to get a permit tomorrow that it's under the new rules, but I could be wrong. There may be some sort of grace period, but I don't really know. Can I say the Yes in My Backyard campaign first of all, there are Yes in My Backyard groups all over the world. And some of them are focused on zoning, absolutely. This is the first time we really talked about zoning. For the first 3 years, since 2018, our message is everyone deserves a safe, affordable, hopeful place to call home. And when that's the case, our entire community benefits. Our purpose with the Yes in My Backyard campaign was mostly just to get people used to the idea that affordable housing is good. Because we want to build a lot of it, and we want to be welcome in the neighborhoods that we come to. And so far we have been. We've been welcome in the neighborhoods we come to because they see that we're bringing value as Redwood. We're bringing value when we build affordable housing in a neighborhood, in the neighborhoods that we've come to. So I just wanted to say we're not actually zoning experts in any way. And that's not really the focus of the YIMBY campaign. It's mostly a public, we just want
create more awareness that,
awareness that affordable housing is needed.
Yeah.
And this is part of it. Affordable housing means something different to everybody. Like it is a defined term as far as the provincial government is concerned, but it means different things to different people. So some people, when you say affordable, what they hear is social housing, or they hear like shelters, even some people, but those are very different, right? Yeah. So, or they think like subsidized housing, they think different things, but affordable, as far as the province is concerned, affordable means 30% of the household income for a low to moderate income household. But low to moderate income household is a defined term as well, at the 60th percentile. So not even at average, at the 60th percentile, so more than average, 30% of your income. The 60th percentile in Simcoe County at the last calculation was about $92,000 a year for the household, which makes it $2,250 per month is considered affordable. So because that's the ceiling, right, then this becomes the ceiling too. And we don't have subcategories. We don't have, but you also need to have this many units at this level and this many units at this level. We just say, in order to be affordable, it has to be here, or the other piece of that is, or average market rent, whichever one is lower. So right now our average market rent is still lower than this 60th percentile, 30% of the 60th percentile, right? But it's average market rent. So then you look at the official plan for the city of Barrie. That meeting is coming up on October 19th.
Okay.
Draft 2. And the plan says that 10% of all new units will be affordable, which means 90% of the units will be unaffordable to 60% of the population.
Oh, wow.
And that's the plan, right? And so we push back. We said it should be 30 at least. And we have said things like, this plan needs to center the needs of the people who live here, not the people who want to invest here. This needs to be a resident-centered plan, not an investor-centered. Who is writing this plan that 10% is affordable? And how does that even work? Because how can you build 90% of your units and somehow how can 90% of your units be above average market rent. It doesn't even make sense. Like, even average just keeps coming up and up and up. When you do that, then the average just climbs, right? That's one of my pet peeves right now, Deepak.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting point you made, that the average is going up and still then, they're going to be only 10% will be below average. So when the average is rising so fast, the prices are rising so fast, then also we can't do that. So if you look at the near future, and I think I think it was developers during the meeting pointed out that, the average rent is going to be 3,000 in near future. I think he argued because there will be less housing. So that was arguments from all the developers that if you stop doing that, and there will be less supply and prices go through the roof. And I understand that's their business, and they're making that argument. But we still see the prices going high. The average is going up and up. So it doesn't seem to have any end in sight.
No, and they also they like to talk about trickle down housing somehow. And so this idea, right, that when I build, even if I build luxury apartments, people will move from the affordable apartments into the luxury apartments, and that frees up the affordable apartment. But as you know, an apartment that's $1,100, one of the only things that's keeping it at $1,100 is that you can't raise it too much on the person who's living there. In between tenants, you can change that to anything you want, right? So in between tenants, the landlord that you were talking to went from $1,100 to $2,000. So there's nothing saying somebody moves into one of these apartments, it's going to be $1,100. And I think about my townhouse again. That townhouse, the idea would be that even if the newer units are more expensive, that the older units will still be affordable. But we just talked about how my old townhouse is now going at the same rate as the new ones because it has more space, right? We are not seeing, I am yet to see anywhere any kind of trickle down affordable housing. It's a theory, but I have never seen it play out in real life ever.
That's interesting. And this, I was, trying to make sense of the council meeting. So this definitely helps. So my, last couple of questions. One is, I talked last week to Margaret Crawford. She is,
Margaret's great. Yes.
Yeah.
Simcoe County Coalition. Yes.
Yeah. Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition. And she pointed out, climate change needs to be, dealt at the local level. And one of the solutions is have more densely populated cities. And she said, we have to find right balance between building high rises that, just mess up the neighborhoods versus having large, detached houses. So there should be, a middle path. And she said, but there need to be more densely populated cities, so that will make public transportation more viable, get people off the cars. And this, so do you think, this legislation, which will, reduce the new supply and will make city less dense, and will result in, sprawling city, out of the boundaries to accommodate, more people that are coming in?
I think that the result of these bylaws is not going to have, I think that the overall result of the last couple of years of changes in what people can build in their existing neighborhoods helps with what's called infill development. So this is this idea of, rather than spreading out, we'll fill in the gaps inside our infrastructure, right? And I think that is more affordable to build for sure, but it's more affordable for the individual to build, but it's also more affordable for the city because it's building on existing infrastructure. There was a neat, well, it's not, again, not new math, but it's a more recent example of it. In Ottawa, the city is also doing their official planning, and they asked their planners to bring them back a report about the cost per person, per capita, per person that lives in Ottawa, of infill development versus sprawling into fields that don't have sewers or electricity or anything, like when we have to build all that up, right?
Yeah.
And expand the transit to go with it, and add schools and add hospitals and all the things and roads. So the finding was, I'm going to mess it up, but the gist of it was, when you go out, it costs Ottawa citizens about $600 per year per person, beyond what the developers pay in development charges to service all this growth. If you fill in, do the infill development, beyond, you save $400 per person per year, right? So not only does it cost you less, you actually make money, and that's back into the city's pocket. They can spend on libraries, or make transit free, or whatever. So one of the things that Margaret has taught me is there's affordable housing, but there's also affordable communities, right? And you can think more holistically, because nobody lives in a house in a vacuum, right? So, and really, when we talk about affordable, another way to look at it is, once I've paid my housing costs, do I have enough money left over for my other basic needs? And that calculation depends partly on how much your other basic needs cost. So if you have $10 a day daycare, for example, that helps a lot.
Yeah.
If you can take the bus everywhere, that helps a lot too.
Exactly.
If your transit system is so well used that your bus pass costs $40 instead of $200, that helps too. So one of the things that we do need to consider is the density, because what Margaret has taught me is that below a certain, and they know, like the planners, and they know these numbers, they're setting their densities for growth, but they also know the density needed for a transit system to be self-sustaining and get to the point where you can offer it cheaply or even free, right? So that needs to be part of the conversation when they're engaging the public on their official plan. They know that they're saying they want this density, but they know that there's no way that they will have good transit unless they hit this density.
Yeah.
That needs to be part of the conversation. Even if the public says, you know what, I don't care, I want to live in urban sprawl, I don't want to take the bus. At least they've been part of the conversation. But what's happening is these things aren't, that kind of information isn't even being put out to the public so that they can make these kinds of, when we speak back to the city, make submissions, make comments on official plans, and the county's doing their comprehensive municipal review right now too. When we're having those conversations, the public needs to have that information so that they can engage in an educated way.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And my last, question I couldn't help to ask. I was a little bit troubled by some of the language from a few residents. I think it was gave me the kind of anti-immigrant and that kind of sentiment. And a few months back, or maybe a couple of years back, I come across a flyer that how it was about Brampton or maybe Mississauga, that a few decades back it was white, and if you now see it's all mixed communities, and it's no longer white dominated. And I'm not necessarily saying that this meeting and the residents were had that attitude, but do you see because of a lot of people moving out of Peel region, out of Toronto, going into other towns nearby, do you see that kind of anti immigrant and people moving in that sentiment building up? Do you see that fiction in communities?
Some, yes, and I'm sorry that you felt that in our city. I wish that hadn't happened. But I know what you're talking about. I picked up on it in the meeting as well, but it obviously, I'm much less sensitive to it than you would be, and so I apologize that you experienced that in one of our city meetings. That's not great. What I think about that is that those kinds of comments come from scarcity and fear. And I think that they are the result of messaging that has to do with, I don't know, have you heard ever of like the millionaire tries to tell the guy making, the CEO tries to tell the guy making $25 an hour that the problem is the guy making $15 an hour, right? And so then we get distracted down in here, right? And so the people who run the corporations that are gobbling up all of our housing, for example, are pitting the people against each other, like the residents and the people who are looking for new apartments and the international students that come to Georgia. And I think that's probably what we heard, especially in relation to Georgian College, right? It's easy to pit us against each other and distract us from the fact the real problem is that they bought all the housing and they hold all the money and that's the real issue, right? And so I think that it comes from a fear and a scarcity mindset. And I think that if we can take a bigger picture look at it and see what the real threat is, the threat is absolutely not international students or anyone moving here from another country. That is not the threat to our housing system at all. And we need to educate ourselves about that and get united at looking at the real problem and solving the problem where it actually lies.
Yeah, and maybe one last question. And you talked about Georgian College and Ward 1, and this also came up during meeting, and that was, and I started last month, almost a month back, working for Barrie community media, so relatively new to all these issues and the ward and demographic of different wards. So it came during the meeting that they were trying to enforce. They're hiring a couple of more people, trying to go out and check the compliance of basement apartments and I think it was Councillor Morales mentioned that this all came up during the meeting related to Ward 1, that students are moving into the basement apartment, and that also kind of gave me the feeling that city is little bit giving in to the demands of the existing residents who are predominantly white, that they are trying to monitor more racially dominated neighborhoods, and trying to that gave me the impression that, and I'm definitely going to talk to city officials, and this is definitely not a question for you, but trying to understand if this is trying to hire a couple of people just to go out and go into these neighborhoods where international students are coming in. There are more non-white people living in, going into those community and trying to do the community watch. I think that gave me that impression that this, and that was kind of also unsettling.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
That's what is going on. I was like, this is
So you can't zone for people, you can only zone for buildings. And unfortunately, in this particular instance, when we're talking about houses that have been rented out to more people than they should be, for example, which is the responsibility of the landlord, not the people who have accepted the rooms in that house.
Mhm.
I've been a student that rented a room in a student house, and I was just like trying to find a place. Right? You're not really thinking about all the politics and all the things. You're like, where can I find something for like $500 and I'll take it, right? Or where your friends are, you know, and you don't care as much when you're a student if it's a little bit crowded. You don't often care. You don't have very much stuff. You're not there a lot anyways. You're just trying to find somewhere cheap,
Yeah.
and get on with your business, right? Most of us have lived the student life, and we can remember and relate. Unfortunately, this particular, what you've just raised, is probably going to disproportionately impact tenants who are international students, tenants who are not white. And yeah, we need to think about how we can address that, because it is going to have, it's going to disproportionately affect people who are not white. Now, it'll be the landlord that gets in trouble, if you will, get a fine or whatever. It'll be the landlord, but it's the people who live there who have to face whatever backlash is coming in the neighborhood, right? So legally, there shouldn't be any ramifications for the people who are tenants in those homes. I'm trying to think. I'm going to look into that more now that you've raised it. I'm going to look into it more myself. Yeah. And just make sure, because you're right, that could absolutely have an unintended racial outcome. Yeah. Racialized outcome. Like, yeah, no, you're right. I'm going to look into it. I can't say, I can't promise that anything will come of it.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, I understand.
Yes.
Yeah, I can. No, sorry for putting into this.
No, that's okay.
On
No, I don't mind at all. I'm a fan of asking tough questions, and if I can help with that, then I will. So.
Yeah, because this came to my mind when I was reading this article, and I will send you in Washington Post, and that was in the U.S. about parking in Washington D.C. and how Black neighborhoods are disproportionately affected because police enforcement is more in those areas, and and
yeah, we know
what,
that.
Yeah, and that's what really caught my attention, and I'm I was very concerned, and I'm definitely try to get somebody hold of somebody at city, and that's, and I sorry, but one point I have to mention about international students, and because I was the international student in the US, and international students in Canada pay almost 3 times more than the domestic
you subsidize
students.
our whole, you subsidize our college like our whole system, our college system, 100%.
Yeah, that's the reason they have to live in small rooms and small houses. And again, that's I couldn't help but use the word the war against immigrants. That's what I felt during the city council meeting, and I will definitely follow up more. But this has been such a great help. Thank you so much, Jennifer, because I was trying to decode the meeting and trying to understand, because I'm new and I did not want to jump to any conclusion before. So talking to you, talking to Margaret, and listening to other people definitely helped a lot. So I thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. Anytime, Deepak. It's a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you. Have a nice weekend. Long weekend. Bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye.